go. Such a voice. All right. So, like I had mentioned, a bit of a Q&A time tonight, as I literally ran from the moment I got up this morning until right now. So,
that's why I asked you if you got any rest today.
did your best. I had about 5 minutes after my girls left tonight, and then before I had to run over to the neighbors for the last hour, and then it's now. So anyway, so
No, I hope, just to be sure, I hope everyone knows that. I'm sorry if that was offensive. What I said was a inside joke from the Christmas Vacation movie. I wasn't serious. It was just a.
I let everyone know you're a little bit off before we started tonight. So
I picked up on it, Joel.
The little lights aren't twinkling.
Oh no. Okay.
Anyway, I don't know, unless someone else has something right away. Megan had asked something about the Pope, and Megan, was there anything in particular, if you can hear me, going on right now?
I have a question about it, if she does.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. What? So, all right. Jesus did say, "On this rock I will found, my church," to Peter.
Yep.
And he's the one that changed his name to, which means stone.
Yep.
It was Simon. What the Catholic Church has ran with that and said that he was the first pope.
Right.
Because he was the bishop in Rome. I mean, I guess I'm curious about that, because I would, I get that, like, all right, he was definitely, he was chosen, no question. But as far as the Pope is concerned, then it would make sense. Here's my question. It would make sense that God would give us
a leader.
Maybe answer my own question. Like, a leader, of the church. I just don't. As far as like him being infallible, that's the problem I have. It's like he's not.
Yeah. Okay, there's a ton there. So what Joel refers to is Matthew chapter 16. Got it, Meg. I'll jump on that after answer this, which might take a half an hour. Just so Matthew chapter 16. This is after Jesus had asked the question, who do people say that I am? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And he said to them, but who do you say that I am? This is Matthew 16, and verse 16 now. Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Well, I'll finish that. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay. So yeah. Yes. Catholics go right to this verse and they say, see, he said Peter is the rock. Very likely he meant that. Okay. The word Peter in Greek, Petros, means rock. And as you look at the book of Acts, before that, when Jesus told Peter that he would betray him or deny him 3 times, he said, I tell you that, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. He says, but Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, or Satan's after you to sift you as wheat. However, I have prayed for you, and when you are restored, strengthen your brethren, is what he says. You look at the book of Acts, Peter was the one that stood up and gave the speech. The first 8 chapters basically surround Peter and his exploits. When Paul the apostle became an apostle, the book of Galatians actually tell us that Paul had to go and submit his gospel and his ministry to Peter and the rest of the disciples. Okay, so over and over and over again, you do see this reality that Peter was the de facto leader. But what's interesting is that when we finally get to the later part of Acts, what is it, Acts chapter 15, something like that, when they had their first convening in Jerusalem, it's not Peter who's actually presiding over it. Acts chapter 15, the Jerusalem Council. It's James.
Oh, my bad.
It's James. James is the guy in charge. So Peter's still alive. How come he's not the one calling all the shots here? There's some good questions. So
Yeah, okay.
this is here's a lot here. I do believe Peter was the de facto leader that Jesus knew the disciples would look to. He was probably one of the oldest. He obviously was, he was in the inner circle. It was Peter, James, and John, all the way throughout the Gospels, if you saw the inner circle. And Peter was the one that Jesus pulled aside after the cross. Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And he was, as I said, the one that gave the speech, the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, where 3,000 people came to salvation that day. So by sheer leadership, Peter, I believe, was, yes, the one that Jesus was meant to launch, the first ministry of the church, you would say. However, that doesn't mean that there has to be a seat of the Pope. It just doesn't mean that. Jesus never said that. He said, on this rock I will build my church. Yes, and Peter began to build. And they looked at him, and he ministered. And he did, powerfully. However, as you look to the book of Acts, yes, the first 8 chapters are about Peter, and then suddenly Peter drops off, and it's all about Paul and what Paul did. If you actually look at the New Testament, Paul by far wrote more than anybody else put together, and then you see the Jerusalem Council. Peter was just a participant. He wasn't the leader. James, the Bishop of Jerusalem, was. So what I think was going on here, Jesus did mean that. I don't honestly believe that he meant there has to be one guy in charge who holds all the papal power that everybody looks to.
Yeah, that's
it just got, I don't know.
What is he referring to when he said the keys?
of the kingdom.
Keys of the kingdom, secrets of the kingdom, the authority of the words of Christ. There's a reason why Jesus poured into these, 11 guys, for 3.5 years, as he was giving them the true secrets of the kingdom. All power and authority I'll give you, the truth of the gospel that sets people free from sin and from demonic oppression, possession, and power, and therefore they did have the keys of the kingdom. You know, sadly, I've never seen a pope lay hands on anybody and see people jump out of a wheelchair, you know.
Slap hands. Though.
Go ahead. Was that Greg?
I've seen him slap somebody's hand before.
You know what's crazy is that the Pope, I think we all probably know this, but the Pope obviously was, Greg, you just said he slept, whatever. Yeah. And it's that he had power over kings in Europe.
And emperors.
Like a Caesar, you know. I don't know. That just blows me away.
You know,
Says he still doesn't.
And I mean, I do respect.
oh sure. You know, there should be a respect there, you know, for the office. I mean, you know, whoever holds that seat of authority commands the greatest influence on the planet when it comes to Christendom. He just does. And so, you know, how much more important for that person to be a godly man. So here, I'll say it this way: did God intend it that way? I'm just going to argue I doubt it. I do not see that anywhere in Scripture that this is, you know, it all comes down to one person. Did he say, "Upon this rock I will build my church"? Yeah, he did. You know, the Martin Luther, as well as the rest of evangelical Protestantism, they do back up and point to Peter's statement of Christ. And I'm not fully convinced of this, but this is something for me just to throw out there that you'd be aware of. Back in Matthew 16, when Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Some scholars, well, Luther actually said Jesus was actually referring to Peter's statement that Jesus was the Christ, that was the rock that he would build his church on, that truth. That's a possibility. It's a possibility. To be fair to the text, though, I don't think he was actually meaning that. The fact that Peter's name means rock, I think, is pretty apparent. And I think Jesus was looking at Peter and he's like, "You are going to be the rock that will be the stable one as the church begins to grow and build." However, what he doesn't say is, "After you, I want you to lay hands on someone, and there's going to be a papal succession from now to the end of time, where one person is going to be in charge of my church and tell them what to do." Just get that, you know. And just like human beings love to do, they love to just jack it up and make up their own rules and fall right back into order and ruledom and all of it, and going, okay, what's the formula that we need to have to get to heaven? You know, you go 300 years after the cross and it looks just like the Pharisees. The thing is tore down, and it's so stupid. When Jesus is like, "This is not what I came to do. I want koinonia love. I want fellowship. I want all of you to take my word and ingest it and know it and speak it and preach it and to the ends of the earth." Not one guy. On the heels of that, however, God does end up working through systems that man creates. The people of Israel, God never wanted to have a king. You actually go back and you look at what happened in Samuel. When Samuel was the prophet, all the people cried out and said, "We want a king." And God told Samuel to tell the people of Israel, "I don't want them to have a king. I want to be their king." Okay. But they continued to ask and continue to ask and say, we want to be like the rest of the nations. We want a king. And so God just relented. He's like, okay, fine. I will give you a king, but you don't know what you're asking for. It's going to be a big giant disaster. Yeah, you'll have some good ones, but most of them are going to be awful. So here we go. And so he gave the king. Yet he used that system, and he promised them that the Messiah would end up coming through that line and would one day rule and reign as a Lion of the tribe of Judah, forever and ever. I mean, Jesus literally, I mean, we don't really get this because we have such a Western mindset, we just, the whole idea of a kingdom and kings and queens and all that stuff, it's been so far removed from us. There's really no real country on the face of the planet that really operates that way anymore. I mean, they might have kings and queens as figureheads, but it's all parliamentary, and it's all representative republics and democracies and things like that. However, when Jesus comes back, he literally will sit on a physical throne, ruling as a king from a city on earth. And God used that system that originally he didn't want them to use, but he said, I will acquiesce to it and I'll work through it to accomplish my purposes. So, all that being said, does that make the papacy completely illegitimate? No, I don't believe so. And I don't believe that he is God's man to represent everything that he wants on earth. I vehemently disagree with that. But does God work through that office? Yes. You look at, there's been some really great popes throughout history. There's been some really awful ones too, very evil ones. But you look at John Paul II, John Paul II, amazing guy, godly man, absolute godly man. Made inroads into, the Protestant realm. It was through him that they had Vatican II and, changed everything, brought, the the Catholic Church out of the Dark Ages and said, hey, guess what? You don't have to speak Latin anymore, and you can use your whatever vernacular in country that you live in. So with that such great power and authority, I do believe God can use it, even though he did not intend for it to be what it is today, if that all makes sense. Linked with that gets to Megan's question, because I had some time ago I had mentioned there was a vision that a guy had back in the 1300s, I believe. His name was Saint Malachi, and if I remember right, he was from the Celtic Isles, somewhere in the British Isles, and took a pilgrimage to Rome. And he claimed that as he climbed the crest of Rome, he was thrown into a vision, and claimed that the Lord had showed him every single pope that would precede the one that they currently had then. And for each and every pope that he was shown, he was given a phrase that would define their papacy. And you could easily dismiss it. However, if you read it and you pair it with history, I actually posted a link today in both of the chats, I think, that had to do with this prophecy. And the guys that actually researched it, one of them was actually a retired Assemblies of God minister. And these, if you want to read it, it's called Petro Romanus, I believe, is the name of the book. And it just details all of it. The guy's name, what was their name? Russell, do you remember their names?
No, I don't. No.
What was their names? Driving me nuts. I can post it again if you like. But they said, aside from, a few that were kind of like, that could really kind of be anything. There were a number of them that were so strikingly spot on that they said, we can't deny this. This guy could not have guessed this or made it up. And they go through a few of the examples. However, the interesting thing is, they released this book probably 8 years ago, something like that. At least would have been 2014 or 15, I think. The very last pope on the list, according to the list, is the current guy that we have right now, Pope Francis. And I believe there was 112 of them that were listed. And the final prophecy that the guy had in the vision, sorry, my mom's trying to get on. She's still having trouble here. It says that the prophecy read on there will sit Peter the Roman, and he will guide his people through a great tribulation. I don't know. I don't know.
One thing I'm very curious about with that. We've talked a lot about the end times and we've all read Revelation that there'll be an Antichrist. I wonder where the Pope will stand between that. You know what I mean? Having the power he does. Like he knows the Bible as well as anyone. And I'm just saying, like, if someone rises up, it's like, what are we just gonna, I'm just curious. I don't want to go on a rabbit trail. I'm sorry, but it's just because the Pope does have power.
He does. Hold on, give me 1 second here.
And I'm just saying, maybe that would make him our best friend. Do you know what I mean? Like, we are not going to allow this, or I don't know.
I don't know.
At that point, it's going to be too far. I get that. But you know what I mean, though? Like,
yeah, I do.
With world domination.
Think of the other side with it. The way the last 2 years have been.
Oh,
is it possible that that paradigm of what we're used to, that Pope looking like, will still exist at that point? Could be completely gone.
Yeah.
True.
Or it could be stronger. So I think when I read it too, I read in it, the first few times I read Revelations, I read into it like the false prophet would be by default a world leader in
a religious realm,
or religious order, which by default in my mind would be the Pope. But who knows? Maybe what if the Pope doesn't exist? Then what if it's something completely different?
Yes.
What if it's a robot?
What if the Catholic Church is hijacked? A lot of Bible scholars throughout the ages have pointed to the Catholic Church. I mean, Luther pointed to the Pope in Rome saying he is the Antichrist. He did. There is this passage that talks about, the beast will sit on 7 hills. Well, Rome is a region of 7 hills, and so that it's really hard. And with all of the imagery that John speaks about, it's really hard to not acknowledge that, at least as a possibility.
That's the woman that rides the beast, and the woman represents, or the church is Christ is a woman. I mean,
the harlot represents the false church.
Okay.
The false worship of the beast that will end up, as Greg said, basically being the religious arm of the beast system. Right now, the way things are going, unless stuff changes, I've talked to a lot of Catholics that that I'm close with and trust and are, real believers. one of them was a priest, actually, wasn't that long ago, if I remember right. And I, posed the question. I said, the way things are going, if it doesn't change, do you foresee a split in the Catholic Church? And they said, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. I mean, can you imagine seeing that? What would that even look like? Yeah, I think we had actually had some discussion on that a few weeks ago, where, I mean, actually in history, it had happened before. There was the East and West split when the Greek church split off from the Roman church, and that's what actually created the Greek Orthodox Church and then the Roman Catholic Church. They're two separate entities.
Constantinople, right? There's Rome and.
Yep. And then you've got the Russian Orthodox Church, it's not Roman Catholicism, and yet they have their own pontiff. The Greek Church has their own pontiff. And then you had Henry VIII, when the Pope wouldn't grant him an annulment. He said, well, forget this. I don't want to be married to this woman anymore. So I'm just starting my own church so that my bishop will give me an annulment and I can get married to whoever I want. I mean, that was literally the reason for the creation of the Anglican Church. It's ridiculous. And then that's when that started. When the Puritans left England and began to start the colonies, and they began to break away from that church, they started the Episcopal Church. Anglican priests gave up their presence in the English church and started the Episcopalian Church. And the funny thing is that they can all claim apostolic succession from Peter, because they were all they all had roots back in the Roman Catholic Church. So what will it look like? Like you said, Greg, I mean, there's a very good possibility that yes, the Catholic Church splits, where those that let's get something straight. It's really easy to just trash the Catholic Church, and that's not fair. There is some very wonderful, powerful, godly, Jesus-loving people that love the Lord that are a part of the Catholic Church. Okay?
Some of my best friends are Catholic. Russell's one of them.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Anyway, hope that's okay.
However, I think what we can be coming to a head and possibly seeing is the conservative faction finally going, we've had enough. I mean, to be fair, this current Pope, when he first came on the scene, he did some things. I was like, I kind of like this guy. The more and more that he has done, I'm going, this is not good. Okay. I mean, he's backtracked off of, traditional marriage, and he's like, well, who am I to judge? And I'm like, are you kidding? It's in God's word. It's one man, one woman. Enough of this nonsense and pandering to, what the masses want. And so is it possible that, the truly godly faction of the Catholic Church will finally rise up and go, we've had enough. We're done with this, and if you're not going to change your ways, we'll split off and find someone who's willing to lead us in a godly manner. And the faction that remains that's wicked, could it be hijacked, like I said, by the beast system to be utilized?
You know what I think about if there's a split, and I know this is a very simple comment, but I bet one side will be pro-life and one will be pro-choice. I think yeah, pro-death. That would, there's a whole lot more that goes along with that, of course, but I bet that's one of the big differences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That and gay marriage. I mean, it's just.
Yep. One thing that you mentioned, I'm sorry to butt in, very, very important. It's not as simple as just pointing a finger at the Catholic Church. Anyone, they could point the finger back and be like, you know what, the Assemblies of God has corrupt. You know what I mean? And that's generally, that's what I've originally, I mean, have mostly subscribed to it. Or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It's the Lord that I follow. It's not any church, but I'm just saying, I think about that, and it's like, it's just not as simple as it's like, put it this way. I have Catholic friends that are more godly than Assemblies of God friends. Right.
Absolutely.
And I'm just,
Absolutely. Yeah.
if
And
that's okay, I just want to make
I mean,
a difference.
Jesus, and here's the other thing, these one of the signs, I believe, of the end times that we are going to see is a continual and measured dissolution of denominational lines. Jesus' prayer in the garden was that we would be one.
Yeah.
His Father is one. I mean, what a weird prayer to pray. I mean, before any of the the fracture of the Christian church happened, back in the 1500s with after Martin Luther left the Catholic Church. It's really strange that Jesus would pray, Lord, I pray that you would make them one. Well, what the heck is he talking about? I think a big part of it is just this, that I think the Lord foresaw all of these theological divisions that would seriously divide us according to these subcultures within his kingdom the thousands of years down the line. And he's like, there's going to come a time when that's going to be a thing of the past. And one of the things that actually brings people together more than anything is actually persecution and trouble. And it's not only going to be the Christian church that will come together, but it will be the Christian and the Jews, the children of Israel, that will end up becoming the body in Christ. And that's exciting. And we're seeing that now, actually. We're starting to see that now.
I'm sorry. When you said that the persecution can sometimes bring, it said that in Exodus, the harder they would basically persecute them, the stronger they would get the Hebrew people, right?
Yep.
And I'm just looking back. I remember 9/11. I'm sure we all do. And I remember after that, there came such a wave, like a revival. And I'm just saying, that's encouraging.
It is.
It's encouraging. It's like
I think there's a strong one coming now too.
I
Yeah.
do too.
The more and more
I do
people
too.
that I meet, that I'm around, the
Oh.
reason that they're there is because something happened in their life that made them get there, or they had some sort of divine intervention that put them there.
Yeah.
It's amazing to experience it, being around all these new people that I've never met before, and know a lot of new people over the last year, and going into these meetings and whatever I'm doing on a daily basis. But it's really encouraging. That helps to kind of continue to have faith in what the future holds, even though it's
Uncertain on our end.
Yeah, on the verge of scary.
Yeah.
As I think about it coming up, we got some pretty tough times coming, I think. But on the other side of it, I think if we can, like say, be one together, we will make it through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting thing. I mean, we have to remember that this is God's plan. This isn't like, oh shoot, everything went awry and God has to somehow limp us all through it. No, this was the plan. It was. It's not a nice thought when you think of all the difficulties that we might have to face, but you look at the passages in the book of Revelation that talks about how the Lord has cleansed his bride, and the bride has made herself ready, pure and spotless, right? Without spot or wrinkle. And what's the only thing that really produces that? It is divorcement from the world and unity with Christ. And sadly, we've seen, especially as one of the drawbacks of blessings and prosperity is complacency. We get everything that we need, and we get to the point we don't need God. It's the same exact thing that happened to Israel time and time again. And it's the same exact thing that's happening to the United States and Europe and every other story, every other country where that's happened. We get to a place where we don't need God, and so we don't go after him. And for the Lord's plan is to create in us the image of Christ. That is the number one thing. You read the first and second chapters of the book of Ephesians. He's predestined us to be conformed to the image of his Son, not to have your best life now, regardless of what Joel Osteen says. Okay, it's about to be like Jesus, and that takes fire. And for a pure and spotless bride at the end of all time, it's going to take probably the most intense fire and trials that we've ever seen. What else is going to drive Jews to come after the Christian God? You know, they are so, the book of Romans tells us that blindness in part has happened unto Israel. And yet it also tells us that we will spur Israel onto jealousy, and in the end, all of Israel will be saved. How are they going to be saved? Well, when the beast system starts imposing its will, and we are going to need one another, and it doesn't matter if you're Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, or Jewish.
I'm sorry, when that happens, isn't that where it says that's when Israel will realize, okay, this is not good? When that whole beast system rises, they think that's the Messiah, and then he will sit and it's like, that's when somehow they figure it out. They're like, I mean, according to Revelation.
Yep. And that's and we've talked about this too, I mean, the end can't come, the catching away, the second coming of Christ can't come until, as First Thessalonians chapter 4 tells us, that day will not come unless the man of lawlessness is first revealed. It's himself in the temple proclaiming himself to be God. Once he does that, yes, all of Judaism will realize, oh my goodness, this isn't the guy that we thought it was. And suddenly it's all out war after he makes that declaration, stops the daily sacrifice. And then he goes, I'm God, you worship me or you die. And then the Jews run, for the hills, as well as all the Christians at that point too, because the ones that are watching are going, told you this guy isn't good news, but you wouldn't listen to me, right? And at that point, I believe there'll be a great many that will be martyred, but at the same time, there'll also be a great many that will not be martyred, will do great exploits, walk in miracles, that will show the Jewish people that this Jesus really is the Messiah, and they come to the full realization of reality.
What amazes me with the history of Israel, and I'm sorry to keep talking, I'll shut up, but okay. And I really will. This will be all right. Anyway, is that all throughout history, center stage to every world empire, I mean, take your pick. Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Germany, on and on. They were always right smack dab in the middle of it. And they will be. And they survived everything.
And why? Because Satan hates them. They represent the microcosm.
Absolutely. Holy One of Israel. That's why. And but it's amazing. That's why the Bible is such a rich piece of history. It contains, whether you're an atheist or not, it contains history. And it's amazing. And it will be that same way till the end of the world. It's because they actually are God's chosen people. Well, we kind of are, aren't we? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
spiritual.
Faith of Abraham, I mean, we are spiritual Israel.
All right, I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to go to the bathroom.
So, Megan, did that kind of answer your question to circle all the way back to the? I hope so.
I have a quick question, but I don't know if there's time. And I think I've asked before, but maybe I'll ask differently this time. I am thinking of my mother who is in heaven. And, people always say when you're having a really hard time, oh, your mom is watching down on you and all. Do people in heaven experience the stress and the grief and all that we do? I mean, they can.
I don't believe so. I don't believe they experience stress and grief and anxiety over us. I think there's a good argument to be made from scripture that they do see us. You look at Hebrews chapter 12. It tells us about a great cloud of witnesses. There are some scholars who say, yeah, that's just a textual tool that the writer of Hebrews was using, talking about those who've gone before us. No, I don't believe so. I think heaven, the redeemed of heaven, can look over the balcony of heaven and see us. I just do. Why wouldn't they be able to? When you look again at the book of Revelation, the fifth seal that is broken has to do with the martyrs, and they cry out from heaven, those that have died, and they cry out from heaven. They say, "How long, O Lord, will it be before you avenge our blood and the blood of our brothers and sisters on earth?" They appear to be interceding as well aware of what's going on down on earth. However, what I believe is, I believe all of heaven, those that have died, the saints of the past, can see us. I think they're aware of us. I don't think they're not given omniscience like God is. They can't see all things, but I think they have the ability to look down, possibly check in on us. But with being the redeemed in heaven, there's something that happens. We are glorified, our minds are transformed to the mind of Christ, in that we will have perfect understanding of God's plan as well as his justice. And so they look down and they're like, yeah, you're going through that rough thing. Part of it was because of your free will decisions you made. Other is because of the other free will decisions that other person made that you didn't have any control over. And it's awful, but guess what? We know God has a plan and we see him working. And so we're excited because we know it's like they've got a front row seat to the Grandmaster, his mind, who's playing chess, and he's telling all of heaven what his next move is going to be. And so they're like, we're not worried. It's kind of like, I don't know, watching Avengers Endgame for the second time or whatever, fill in the blank of one of your favorite movies, or Back to the Future, right? And you're just like, oh man, is Marty going to make it or is he not? Well, if you've already seen it, you're just like, I'm not freaked out because I know the end of this and it's good. And I think it's kind of a weird analogy, a loose analogy, and obviously God doesn't reveal everything to everyone, but I think that's probably the closest analogy I can give. Those that have died and are in heaven are fully aware of God's justice. They're fully aware of his plan, and they're not concerned about in a fearful sense. I don't know, does that help, Kim?
Yeah. If they have an idea of what's going to happen, I don't know if they're given that ability. They know that 2 years down the road, I will not have been sued into bankruptcy by this motorcyclist, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. or what it sets you up for on the flip side of it. You know, I mean, you look at Joseph's story, you know. He's this guy who's, you know, a young kid given, you know, these two dreams about basically being the ruler of the world. And then his brothers sell him into slavery, which is bad enough. But then he establishes himself and develops, you know, notoriety in the house that he's in as a, you know, valuable slave and the house manager of a very powerful guy, and then wrongly accused and then thrown in prison. You know, both times the rug is just yanked out from underneath him. And how awful from Joseph's perspective, going, what the heck is going on? This is not fair. And yet he had to go to the prison to meet the cupbearer of Pharaoh so that Pharaoh would have the ear of this cupbearer, and the cupbearer would remember Joseph in prison. And then when Pharaoh had the dream, come to Joseph, I know a guy, bring Joseph before Pharaoh, interprets the dream, and Pharaoh makes him second in command over the whole thing. You know, I mean, God has an eternal perspective that we don't see down here. And that's why it's so painful. But that's also why our faith means so much to him, because he's like, I know you can't see it. Will you trust me anyway? Because I am working it out. This is my hand. And if you'll trust me, you don't have to worry about being a screw up. You don't have to worry about all of the hard pitfalls that have befalled you that are unfair. If you trust me, I am giving you a concrete promise that I'm working all things together for your good. And when we continue to trust that and believe it.
That is a huge struggle that I'm going through right now because of this accident. He's got the biggest junkyard dog lawyer in town, and you know, they have commercials on TV all the time about how they get hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their victims, or out for their victims. And I have to, people keep telling me, and I know I can't keep putting my hands on this. I have got to let it go because it's literally tearing me apart. This guy could sue me into bankruptcy, but I don't think he's going to get very far because his only injuries were a chipped tooth and a broken finger.
Wow.
Now you tell, and I'll let you know how much he gets in the end, but a chipped tooth and a broken finger.
That's
So
that's less than what happened to Johnny Depp, I think. Not
So
too big of it.
that's my challenge and my what I'm just working so hard on, and it's wearing me out. Giving it. Do you know how hard it is to give something to God? This is so huge that I can't even wrap my arms around it. So
I hear you, sister. I hear you.
And you know what, Kim, you said that it's so huge you can't wrap your arms around it. I'm sure when David stood before Goliath, he thought the same thing, but he still had faith, you know, that
yes,
if, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yep.
he was on the right side of the cross. Like, he was on the right side. Like, I don't care if he's 1,000,000 feet tall, you know? And so the
Yeah.
same,
We have to remember that every single Bible story we read, they didn't know the end of it. They
yeah,
did not know the end of it. Abraham, I mean, poor guy. I mean, can you imagine both Abraham and Sarah going, biological clock stopped ticking about 4 decades ago. And what?
I'm 100 years old.
Literally. And yet God does it, right? And what's the purpose of that? Isaac's 12 years old. God turns around and says, All right. I want you to take
Oh.
him up to the mountain and stab him in the heart.
After 100 years of waiting.
What? But what's amazing is that I want to say, I think it's the book of Hebrews again. It says that Abraham believed God enough that he could raise Isaac from the dead. Where did he get that faith? He got that faith by going through that trial that he had gone through before, waiting on the promise of God. And believe me, I'm speaking to myself right here. This is not easy. That's why it's a walk of faith, and it is a sacrifice of faith to trust God at his word. I have knockdown, drag out fights with God probably every other day. Going, are you kidding me? Yet, when we continue on, and as the book of Ephesians says in chapter 6, having done all to stand firm, therefore. It'll be worth it, and the Lord will show himself faithful.
And Jeb, you mentioned something, anger with God. You know, I've done the same thing. I've had my shouting matches, you know. But for all of us, even if that happens, we've talked about this before, all that does is prove how much I do believe in him. I wouldn't get angry at something I don't believe in. And I'm not saying it's okay to curse at God. It's not, but at least I'm shouting up. You know what I mean? I've used the example, I don't get mad every Christmas when Santa Claus doesn't bring me my new toy, because I don't believe in Santa Claus, you know, but I do believe in God, and that's where it's tough sometimes. Yeah. And it's tough on all of us. And he's faithful. I mean, it's going to be okay.
Yep, indeed. So God's in control. He's working out his plan for each one of us. And we'll see his faithfulness in the end. We have to believe that. Otherwise, it's we above all people are most to be pitied, as Paul the Apostle says, if it's not true, you know. Yeah.
Question for you, Joe.
Yeah, Paul, go for it.
I don't know, Revelation, maybe chapter 2 or 3, where it says, even those that pierce me will see him come down from heaven. I guess my question is, now reading it today, that doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, when people who pierce them, that could just as well be us, say, denying them or cursing them or something. Okay.
You know, yeah, that's a possibility. The context of that scripture that actually comes out of Zechariah, I think. It is referring largely to the unbelieving Jewish people, is basically what it means.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it means, because
Not
they have
the ones that crucified them then, when it says, so even those who pierced me will see me.
right. It's a declaration of a general statement of the people group of the Jews, as they have denied that Jesus Christ actually was the Messiah. And when they see him literally come in the clouds, it says they will look on him whom they have pierced and they will mourn, is what it says. You know, can that possibly mean that, you know, even believing Israel at that time will mourn, because, you know, they will think upon the centuries that went by that their people have rejected him, and, you know, the heartache that they caused God because they, you know, called Jesus a liar and a heretic. You know, hard to know for sure, but that passage is referring to the Jews as they come to see Jesus is who he says he was. Yeah.
Okay, because a lot of it's, you know, he who hears, let him have an ear. And so I was just curious if that was for today, for us, that, okay, I don't want to hear that. And it kind of pierces his heart or whatever. Reading too much into it, probably.
Yeah, that's why,
Well, there's nothing else to do with the sore foot.
that's spot on awesome. Yeah, right on. That's that's where context is so powerful. Zechariah 12:10 and John 19:37 are the two references there. They will look on him whom they have pierced.
John what?
John 19:37.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Uh, anybody else? Anything before we wrap her up for tonight?
I have 500,000 more things to say.
7 more from Mr. Myers, please.
Okay.
Buddy.
No.
There's some good stuff tonight. Yeah.
I if it is okay, I won't. I'm gonna make this fast. And as you can see, I don't have light in this apartment. I have light from, so I don't know why I felt it necessary to say that, but there's just a couple things I wanted to say. If anyone you know what I'm done.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, hey, let's pray and we'll call her a night, huh? Well, Lord, we thank you for Christian fellowship, the ability to gather together and to be reminded of who you are, what you promise us, and what you told us in your word, what we can stand on. Lord, each one of us are bearing our own cross in one way, shape, or form. Each one of us are bearing our own pains and difficulties, frustrations, challenges, disappointments, whatever it may be. Lord, you're there through it all. Father, I just ask that you would continue to encourage us and lead us forward as we trust in you. So Lord, we look to you. We trust you. We know that you are working all things together for our good, according to your purpose. So Jesus, we give it all to you. And we give you all thanks and praise now and forevermore. Be with us the rest of this night, the rest of this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, guys. Sorry for the long hiatus between Bible studies, but next week we should be on for it again. So tell your friends.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Bob. Have a good night.